Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Oy Gewalt. That's my sermon. Shabbat Shalom. No, that ought to be my sermon. It could be my sermon. I have been complaining to people all week long. Usually I tell them, I start looking at texts for the sermon on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. And for the whole beginning of the week, I kept saying, I have absolutely no idea what the country's going to look like. So how could I possibly start working on my sermon? But here we are. And here we are at a moment which is still completely unknown, although we have a lot of hope, but still unknown, and we're hanging now. And if there's anything that is clear at this moment, is that there certainly wasn't the blue wave that so many people predicted or hoped for. There wasn't this mass repudiation of the current administration the way that we expected. And perhaps because of that, there are many of us in this community who are feeling sad, who are feeling disappointed, who are feeling a sense of grief and loss about the country that so many of us just thought we lived in once upon a time. You know, millions of people voted for a continuation of the kind of leadership that we have been seeing. Millions of people. You know, we thought we lived in a country where we looked to our leaders to be role models of inspiration and dignity. And yet that's not the case for millions of people. We thought we lived in a country that celebrates that it is a country of immigrants, that seeks a place for all those who come to this country seeking a better life. And yet millions of people voted against that notion. We thought we lived in a country that lifts up the ever progressing march of democracy toward greater rights for those who have been on the margins. And yet somehow millions of people have voted against that. What has emerged for us and what we have to deal with and reckon with now, no matter what the outcome of the election, is a portrait of a country where millions of people don't care that there have been over 200,000 deaths from a pandemic, of which thousands upon thousands of lives could have been saved if this leadership had handled it better. We're living in a country where millions of people don't care about what happened to the separation of children from their families as a scare tactic on our border. We're living in a country where millions of people don't care about the struggles against racism in this country, what's happening to our environment, and the possibility of rolling back healthcare. That's the reality that we have to deal with. And so, of course, so many of us are grieving. How do we go forward? Where do we go? We are looking very hopeful that there will be a major change in the administration, and yet we're dealing with realities where things are going to stay the same in many, many powerful quarters of our government. So my task before you this morning is to offer a message of hope. So you better wish me luck. And ironically, I'm going to pull that message of hope from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in the narrative cycle of the life of Abraham. We all know that story, a society that had turned completely to evil and that God planned to wipe out everyone in that society. Not only is that story disturbing, but we know that destructions of that ilk happen again and again in the Torah, don't they? We read about it just recently in the story Parshat Noach, the generation of the flood. And we will read about it again later when the commands come for the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites, everyone, men, women, and children. That is a profoundly disturbing idea that we are praying to a God who demands that kind of level of destruction, who believes that a society can become so corrupt that it has no more hope, even the men, women, and children in that society. What a chilling idea. which leads us inevitably to ask the question, so where are we here in America in this moment? Have we crossed that line into no more hope? Are we a society like those? Are we becoming a society like those of which there is no more hope for anyone, even the innocents in our society? A deeply disturbing question indeed. I will remind us, however, that as disturbing and as chilling as that concept of God that seems to come out of the Torah is, the Torah itself throws a monkey wrench into that chilling idea in the person of Abraham. We all know the story well. As soon as Abraham heard about the destruction, what did he do? He suddenly becomes human like us. And he has the holy chutzpah to argue against God and say, God, how could you do this? What if there are 50 innocent people left in the city? Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. The judge of all the earth will not mete out justice? Go, Abraham, right? Suddenly the Torah has Abraham saying, this is not an okay God. This is not the kind of God that we want to believe in or that even ought to exist. What is going on here? And then we have this bargaining conversation. God says, I wouldn't destroy, there were 50. What about 45? I wouldn't destroy 45, then down to 30, then down to 20, and finally down to 10. And with that, Abraham gives up and understands that there aren't even 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. This notion of counting souls is something that perhaps resonates with all of us after this week. Just like in the Torah, we have been counting souls all week long, right? I, like you, especially Tuesday night, the soul shredding thing of watching these numbers constantly shift and seeing even colors shift on the screen and not knowing how it's going to be is horrifying. And perhaps on some level of our minds, we are all like Abraham at Sodom and Gomorrah, bearing witness, wondering, fretting about what's going to happen to the fate of this society. How many souls are on the side of progress, of hope, of compassion, of increasing justice for more people? And how many people are on a darker side? That is a very human place of going in our perception of things. And as we've watched numbers in some states going down, dwindling to that proverbial 50, that proverbial 20 and 10, we wonder what is happening. Are we really, is that America that we thought we lived in, this place of this great hope of democracy? Is that just a pipe dream? Is this land that we're living in really a Sodom and Gomorrah? Which, you know what? There's lots of lessons about Sodom and Gomorrah, about this country. Sodom and Gomorrah was founded on green, rich, fertile ground. It was a wealthy, fabulously wealthy society that turned to corruption. Is that the fate of the United States of America? Many parallels to that argument with God, indeed, this week. You know, after not sleeping very well on Tuesday night, Wednesday, if you'll recall, like today was an absolutely gorgeous day. The sun was shining, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I went for my run, and there's some beautiful lakes around where I live here. And I was running around the lake. And at one point there was this young family with their two little ones and playing right next to the lake. And their little ones were frolicking in the autumn leaves. And the brilliant sun was sparkling off the lake and bouncing off their rosy cheeks as they were playing. And those wonderful young parents looked up from their kids and saw me coming by, and they smiled at me and greeted me so warmly. And then at that moment, those little kids looked up and they waved at me as I ran by. What a contrast from the night before, where I was glued to the television and fretting and had a fitful night of sleep and worry and dread about where is this country going. And at that moment of seeing those beautiful faces and that beautiful family and the sunshine and the leaves, I realized there's so much more hope. There's so much more goodness than one would believe if you just looked at the television all the time. There's so much goodness here in this society. Despite what numbers show or tallies show, The human spirit is undaunted. There's still so much goodness everywhere. I want to come back to this notion about getting down to the number 10 and going no further. You know, what many have asked, why did Abraham stop arguing at 10? Why didn't he argue it down to just 1? Rashi explains it's because Abraham knew the story of the flood. And the story of the flood, there weren't 10 people. So he already knew from that story that if you have less than 10, that's not enough to save the world. However, if you have 10 or more, you have the wherewithal to save a society. And of course, this idea of 10 being the basic unit of community is where we get, one of the places we get the idea of a minyan from. The minyan becomes the basic unit of a kihila, of a community and of a congregation. The Seforno, 16th century Italian rabbi, commented on this notion of 10 as the basic unit. And he said, if you have 10, that you have a basic amount who can protest, join together and protest and stop the evil plottings of the society around them. 10 people, good people, decent people, righteous people. If you have 10, then you have the critical mass of people who can act on a vision for a better society. And that presence of that minyan, that at least 10 people, protects the entire society. I want to share that idea with us this morning to say, when we look around at our country, even though there is so many reasons to despair, so many reasons to feel sad and to grieve, even though there are so many people who want to pull this country backward and want to roll back rights and want to move toward greater oppression to certain groups, even though those voices are emboldened and strong, all of that being true, you know what? We still have a minyan of good people in this country. And if you were Abraham right now arguing about whether or not to wipe out the United States of America, God forbid, if you were Abraham, unlike the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know what? You would win. You would win, because not only is there a minyan of good people in this society right now, not only is there 20, 30, 50, there is 50,000. There are millions and millions of decent, good, tzaddikim, righteous people, people of character, people of moral grounding, people who are decent and loving. Millions of us in this country. And that is, God willing, what we are seeing now, hopefully, in the results of this election. Millions and millions of people. You know, the Talmud in Sanhedrin talks about how in every generation, there's a core group of righteous people for whom their sake the world is sustained. That's where we get the famous idea of the Lamned Vavnikim, the 36 righteous people, right? That in every generation, there's always the 36. And the reason why we're all here and we're all going on is because those people are still here. That's the same idea, the same exact notion that, you know what? This is no Sodom and Gomorrah. We're not there. And there's not going to be any fire and brimstone raining down on this society. That's not going to happen, because we have our basic minyan and more than enough of good people. Yes, there are many, many who have disappointed us, but there are many, many, and in fact, more people who want to move this world forward. And I want us all to hold on to that idea. If we can hold on to anything else to get us through this time of uncertainty, this time of threats of violence and social upheaval and ongoing culture wars, let's hold on to that truth. We've got a minyan. It's gonna happen. And we are the children of Abraham. And what that means is that we have inherited a tradition that inspires us to collectively, as the Jewish people, constitute that minyan, to support all the world through our ongoing efforts and actions for justice in this world. No matter what elections say, no matter what demagogues do, no matter what the mob ends up adopting and acting out on, there will always be a minion so long as there are Jewish people and other righteous people, and there are millions of them in the world who join together. So let us find strength in our numbers, and let us move forward and heal this world. And let us all say, Amen.